Welcome to Snow Talk, the podcast series that brings you in-depth interviews for an insider's look at what makes our industry work. We will be speaking with snow industry professionals about life, about business and leadership in this often challenging and always satisfying industry. This episode of Snow Talk is brought to you by Western Snowplows. And now, enjoy Snow Talk, sponsored by Western.
Hello, everybody and listeners, and welcome to Snow Talk, the podcast of SIMA, the Snow and Ice Management Association. I'm your host, Martin Tirado with SIMA, and I'm excited to have another conversation today to discuss part 3 of our snow operations series, which is postseason follow-up and planning for the next snow and ice winter season. I encourage listeners, if you haven't already, to go to SIMA.org podcasts and take a listen to parts 1 and 2 of snow operations preseason and during in-season or mid-season planning. But now the winter season is behind us, and we're looking at how do we evaluate this past winter season and start looking forward to next year already. Do want to welcome back our 2 guests coming back for part 3, and that's Tom Marsan, CSP. He's the general manager of Beverly Companies in Markham, Illinois, and JP Sanieski, CSP, ASM. He's the vice president of operations for the East End Group, based out of Yaphank, New York. That's Long Island, for hopefully I pronounced that correctly. But welcome back, gentlemen. I'm glad you're here and very excited to get into how we do postseason planning. I'm in the Milwaukee area, and one thing we had in the last podcast was we had a little bit of a challenge that we each asked what were our predictions for the rest of the winter. It was mid-season and how we thought we'd finish up. I am happy to kind of say that in Milwaukee, we did end up as an average year. We ended up about mid-40s, kind of depending where you were in the city. And mid-40 inches in Milwaukee is our historical season average. So it really ended up kind of right in alignment of where we typically are. So that was, I think, a success. But just to the south of Milwaukee is Tom. And Tom, I want to just talk to us about how you guys ended up in your winter season.
Yeah, so I think I was being optimistic with my guess the last time we talked. We did end up well below average here. So we had about 45% of our total snowfall based on inches. When it came to events, we had about 23 events, and usually we're somewhere around 35 or so. So definitely a slow year for us as far as snowfall. Over time, we get a handful of these. I would say about 25% or so of our seasons are low, like this year. Yeah, we didn't quite get what we wanted, but we made it through. And I think at the end of the day, it could have been a lot worse as we look around the country and see what some other markets got.
Yeah, for sure. It's challenging, just only a couple hours south of Milwaukee. Big difference between Milwaukee and Chicago. Just kind of shows you the weather pattern differences. But JP, you guys have a large footprint of customers and geographic area, but generally centered around the East Coast, Northeast. What happened in your area?
The Northeast was pretty interesting. It was very spotty throughout the Northeast. You had parts of New Hampshire and the mountains in northern New England that were well above their normal snow totals. But then, if you look out in Buffalo, where we service in Buffalo, they're about 50% above their normal. They had about 155 plus inches for the year. They were high. And then, you have Boston came in they were about 75% less than normal. So they only got about 25% of their normal snow totals in Boston. And then as you move down into Hartford and New York City, again, 50% for Connecticut. They had about 24 inches for the season. They average a little bit more, about 45 or so. New York City for us in Long Island area, 2.3 inches. And they average 29, 30. So they were about 93% below average in New York City and Long Island. And it was interesting. Tom had mentioned, I didn't even think about it, but I was writing some notes and thinking about the services throughout Long Island and New York City and Connecticut. There were such borderline storms throughout northern New England and the tri-state area. There were storms where we went and pre-treated and then nothing happened. We probably could have had 10 plus services throughout New York, Connecticut. Probably 4 or 5 of those were no services were needed because it was so borderline. It was 33, 34 degrees. We didn't get those services. We had one plowable event on Long Island that was not even supposed to be a plowable event. So it started off as a de-icing event, and then the storm stalled and it actually turned into a plowing event, which threw a lot of people off guard for us for our one major 2.5, 3-inch storm that we had that actually stuck. So it was a very strange winter, and across the board, even if we look out towards the mountains in the Midwest and more towards the West Coast, Colorado, Salt Lake City, Wyoming, all those areas got crushed with snow. And the mountains of Colorado, where they're dealing with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 feet at a time. So it was a very strange winter, and it was a hit or miss throughout the regions. But nevertheless, we move on and plan for next year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, did want to mention too. It almost seemed like there was a bit of a middle of the country dividing line from like Mississippi west, Minneapolis. I'm sure some of you followed this. Third highest snowfall total recorded in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities. I think they ended up in the mid 90s for total snow inches, which is pretty. They kind of went nonstop. And then you're at areas it's like southern Midwest and the mid-Atlantic states, southern New England, low to in some areas, no snow. So, these are part of when you get into this business. You guys are experienced veterans. You have to work through the low snow seasons, the high, and then the ones that are in between the averages. So, Tom, kind of going with you, just get some information from you. Like, it's postseason. What are your conversations you're having with your customers in that regard, and how are you kind of preparing for next year after having a fairly low snow season in the Chicago area?
I would say it's business as usual this time of year. We kind of follow our annual schedule of what we do, and we'll go into next season expecting that we're going to have the typical season we expect. And just over the years, we've learned that that's what you have to do. Every year is going to be different. There's going to be highs and lows. So right now, as far as the customer side, we're sending out all our renewals on any contracts that expired. We like to have that done by the beginning of June so we can kind of stay in front of those customers, and while it's fresh in their mind and they're thinking about it, and help us be ready for next year by getting those back as soon as we can. So yeah, some of our RFP processes have started, and some of those things have come out, and we're working on that and getting all our information together. We've just kind of set our prices for next year, and, which gets a little tough, I think, for all of us in this industry on waiting for salt prices and getting that all settled out. But we have to be ready, and we have to be moving now. So we definitely plan to be aggressive and put some new procedures in place for sales and really kind of nail it down. And I think after you have a season like this, it really points out the importance of being on top of that and really trying everything you can to get in front of those ideal customers. So we're having a lot of conversations and meetings and changing some things we do, putting some new things in place, which is typical for this time of year. It's always evaluating what we did in the last year and picking out those points, some of our pain points and the things that we can get better at. And now is the time to talk about it. Yeah. And then as far as the equipment side, we're basically in full swing and pretty busy with the off-season equipment aspect of things. We have everything parked, and anything that's in storage is where it needs to be. We have our initial cleanings on everything done and going through to inspect all the different types of equipment, to make a list and budget for repairs that we have to make and maintenance that we have to perform. And right now is a time that we talk about purchasing equipment and what we're going to need for next year. So we'll have that finalized here in the next week or so we can get any orders in that we have to get in, especially with the way things have been with supply chain. You really have to get that stuff done early and be ready to go. So this is just a different part of the snow season for us, right? We're not in that service mode, but there's a lot of work to be done. And this is some of the most important things that we have to stay on track so we are ready once fall comes.
Those are great points. And one thing I wanted to point out as well, too, and what SIMA and part of our best practices has is the snow service procurement 52-week timeline. And you can download that on our website. But you hit on several of them. It's like, we take a look at snow and ice work as a year-long 52-week process, and we're into this spring and even getting into some of the summer points that's on this timeline. And some of those summer points are like early summer is already talking about what's the equipment that you need for next year. You need to get that in the pipeline. Take a look at what maintenance improvements need to be made too, just to get the maintenance all established. So you hit several of those, which is good. So one thing I wanted to address as well too is anything regarding a low snow winter and inflationary pressures on pricing. Are there any thoughts that you're getting back from customers that may be a little more careful on trying to balance budget with the increasing amount of costs there are just for, again, we talk about equipment, but also raw material supplies and also the people, the personnel and the labor as kind of prices and costs are kind of heading in an upward direction, somewhat, faster than the past. Tom, when you're having those conversations with customers, you hear anything yet already, or what's the thought on that?
Yeah, that was a really big conversation for us this time last year and going into the season last year. There were some major changes in pricing across the board. And like you brought up, labor, and I feel like to some degree that's leveling out. And I think part of that conversation now too is what is the economy going to look like over the next 6, 12, 24 months? And that's part of our conversation when we talk about where our pricing is going to be and what the competition is going to look like. And I think that's more of the conversation and our thought process at this point now compared to last year. Last year was seeing all these increases and making adjustments with that and having the conversations with the customers. And it wasn't just our industry that was having those conversations, which did make it a little bit easier because it was happening across the board. I think we're in a little different spot now just based on coming off of that. And I think there's a big question mark on what we're going to see happen, especially over the next year to 2 years.
Yeah, it's challenging. You can't predict the future and have to kind of make your best estimates. But I hear you. JP, let's kind of talk about with what you're up to, and the season has ended. Where are you at with these customer conversations and planning for next year on the contractual side, plus equipment and everything else kind of in between?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the same things we were doing that Tom was mentioning. Being that it was a low snow and ice winter, we actually were able to start things a lot sooner than normal. So that helps us in the long run for planning, predicting, and seeing what needs to be done. I mean, in general, the Northeast New England, that April 15th through 30th time, you're usually still got some snow piles and you've got snow still on the ground in some areas throughout your regions. And, you've got those colder nights and different situations that could arise. But before April 15th, we were done with snow throughout New England and in the Mid-Atlantic and the tri-state area. So we were already demobilizing sites before our contracts were even over, really. But based on the weather and the forecast, we were able to get things back to our main facilities, look at them, do our postseason inspections a lot sooner. With the lower winter, with not hardly any plowing throughout a lot of our portfolio in New Jersey and in New York, a lot less damage, a lot less things to fix in regards to our properties with curbing and things like that. So that was a plus. There still was some damage that we had to jump on, but it was a lot easier to fix. The equipment usage, we didn't run a loader in Long Island or New York City or Long Island. We ran just our plow trucks. So it's a strange winter. All of our stuff went out prepped, and we didn't put 1 hour on 95% of our loaders because there wasn't enough snow, and it was de-icings and things like that. So the equipment went out. We run them in every couple of weeks just to make sure batteries are working, and brought them back. So a lot of repairs weren't as typical as in the past if it was a busier winter. So that's helped with our fleet and our mechanics, to be able to make sure stuff's ready and good to go for next year. This time of year, at the same time, customers are, I think this year, a little bit ahead of the game, getting RFPs out and getting communication out in regards to contracts, which is great. And it helps us be prepared and be able to plan and predict what is going to come through in the next few months for new contracts. Tom was mentioning, and you had mentioned in regards to costs and trying to predict what happens. I actually feel people are, and it's a sad notion, but they're expecting higher costs now, and they're not really pushing back as much because they know that there's nothing really anyone can do. They want the cheapest price, but they also, a lot of customers, I feel, are starting to really realize it's all about service. It's about what they want for their clientele to really have on their properties. And I feel just with the conversations we've had over the last couple of weeks, and even during the winter, customers want a safe site. And I think it's starting to realize that, a safe site isn't the cheapest site, or a safe site isn't nickel and diming a service partner or a company to be picking and choosing what they want to give you for a good service. They want their sites safe, de-iced, shoveled, plowed, and they're coming to a realization, I believe, that to get that, you need to have a fair market value, and you need to be able to know that you're going to get these services, and the customer needs to know that the service partner is there. I mean, you shouldn't really be servicing a property any less dependent on money. It should be based on safety and then what you want to provide as a customer to your client. But it does come down to that a lot. We use sub-proprietors on some areas, and we self-perform. We never want our self-performing to always be like, oh, you guys self-perform, and these are great sites, but your subs over here aren't doing as good of a job representing your company. It comes down to the money or the service level. You know, customers want that service, I think. And that's the biggest thing that I think I've noticed over the last few months and year is that customers are really coming around to, we want service. And yes, this is not going to be a nickel and dime situation. So I think that's one thing that I've picked up on. And they know that fuel costs might change, or salt quantities, pricing per ton might change, or labor rates in areas that, you know, were typically this are now this. So they're coming to an understanding of the environment that everyone's in. They're not looking at price first. They're looking at, what do I want for service? And then determining, okay, this is a fair market value for what they want for service. So I think that's been nice to see. I mean, you're still going to have struggles, and you're still going to have customers out there that they're going to go with, especially when you bid multiple sites or have multiple people bidding, they're going to look at the overall lower cost. But we've noticed that they're starting to look at relationships. They're starting to look at communication. They're starting to look at what type of service they get from that person or that company that they don't get from others. And you're able to get that fair market value. You mentioned RFPs. We are in the process right now of filling out RFPs and getting those deadlines. You know, some are starting now and in the next week or two. You know, we're just trying to really make sure we're looking at everything and making sure we're ready for next year.
That's good stuff. That's a real positive, I think, on customer awareness of the increasing costs that just are out there on inflation. Versus the pushback. I think that's a real positive feedback or, you know, information that you're getting back already, especially after a low snow year. That's I think very positive. Just kind of some realization of what the current just economics of property and building management and services are right now. So that's great. Good to hear. We are going to take just a quick commercial break to hear from our sponsor. So we will be right back to Snow Talk Podcast in just a minute.
When plowing is your profession, it's up to you to keep the world moving through winter's worst. Less time worrying about your equipment is more time for clearing lots. So we'll cut to the chase. Only Western builds efficiency into every feature of our plows and spreaders. With 65 years of experience behind us, we know what it takes to save time and stay profitable. So we make one promise: more jobs done faster.
Welcome back to Snow Talk, the podcast of the Snow and Ice Management Association. Wanted to kind of keep picking up from where we were talking about, again, the postseason snow operations. The season has ended, and we're working on kind of what next year looks like. And JP, I wanted to kind of go back to you, though, real quickly and kind of talk to Tom as well, the same questions, talking about like subcontractors and our service partners, particularly the ones that really are paid when they perform work and aren't when there isn't any snow. What I know in a low snow year, that can be really challenging for those people. They're kind of waiting or hoping that they would have a certain amount of work and income coming in off of snow work. And it's challenging when they don't, or they're not working. I know, so there's some historical things that happen where people will, you know, find other things to do. They'll do other projects, work for other types of businesses, which I think is good. That's a normal thing to kind of keep busy and money coming in. But anything that you've kind of heard back, any kind of, you know, frustrations or people that have, you know, had challenges on that regard, JP, or kind of working with them as well too on more just kind of looking at the longer term and the 5-year longer seasonal average, that, you know, these kind of weather patterns are gonna change. But JP, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we have multiple different types of contracts. We have a couple dozen service providers that we use throughout our regions. I think some of them have a seasonal contract. Some of them have a per service contract. I think service partners, and just like we at East End, you know, you got to make sure your contracts are diversified. You can't rely on, you know, 100% per service contracts. You can't rely, even on 100% seasonal, because if it was a high winter, the seasonal guys would be complaining and the per service guys would be happy. It's a hit or miss depending on what type of contract. I think overall at East End, we were able to work on other service lines. So we were able to increase different service lines that we're now offering our customers or even new customers. From we're a general contractor, but construction to getting into fiber optics to getting into flagging on state roads and safety roads, trying to use our equipment and our guys in different areas so that on a low winter, we're able to still provide hours and make sure that we're not relying on just snow hours for our teams. I heard a lot from the service partners, the same thing, they know that they have a per service contract, but they're not just relying on snow 100%. I think a lot of service partners are really starting to diversify and get different service lines that are able to keep them positively moving forward and doing work throughout the whole year. You've got your smaller mom and pops that might shut down landscape and rely on just snow 4 to 6 months out of the year. But I think with a low winter and we didn't have an early snow season throughout this time in this area, so people were able to extend their landscape season a little bit longer. And then with an earlier spring, they're able to start their landscape season a little bit earlier. The timeline between land and snow for a lot of these people wasn't as long as normal. So I think in the general, they're doing pretty good, but obviously in a small snow total winter per service contracts, yeah, you're not bringing in the money, but you're not expenditure a lot of money out to payroll or gas or salt. It's a catch-22.
Yeah, no, I can see that. That makes sense. There's a lot of expenses that go down too when there's not an active winter storm. But same thing, Tom. I mean, when you're what about some of the people that you're working with that kind of get paid when it does snow? What's the feedback you're hearing from them after a low snow season?
Yeah, our service partners, are in the same boat as us. Definitely, everybody wants it to snow. I think even when I'll reiterate what JP said, having a diversified contracts between seasonal and per service, this is a big reason why you want to do that. And a lot of our service partners understand that too. And we do have these conversations leading into any season. I get asked a lot, what's this winter going to be like? Are we going to get a lot of snow? And I always give the same answers. I expect an average winter and we don't know, right? But this business, if you really want to be successful in it, it's a long-term business. You can't rely on one season. You can't rely on 2 seasons. And at the end of the day, it's always averaged out over time. So not necessarily things that we're telling them now after this low snowfall season, because that's easy to say now. But we have that conversation when we bring new subs on. That's the way that we'll bring them in. And that's part of the expectation that we like to set because we've seen it before and we don't know. The difference between a few storms missing or hitting us makes a big difference in most seasons. Nobody's happy with the low snowfall. But again, a lot of our service partners they do snow in addition to what they normally do. They have equipment that they use in the summertime, and snow is a way for them to use that equipment in the off season, keep their guys working a little bit in the off season. So of course they come to expect that as part of their business, but it's not necessarily what they rely on. Definitely is something that helps as far as getting through these low snowfall seasons. So yeah, we're definitely having those conversations with people, and I like to talk to them about, we just get to next season and it's probably the worst time to pack it up and say you don't want to do this anymore because we've gotten through the worst of it and we look ahead, right? And next year could be a low snowfall season, but I guarantee the next 3 are not. It's kind of continuing to look towards the future and finding ways to keep those people engaged and I guess looking at what's to come ahead here.
Yeah, good points on that long-term kind of weather forecast and seeing that people have the ability, they're doing other things as well from other types of work from both of you. So that's good. Hey, this is a little bit more on the non-equipment side. This is more on the sales side. JP, you had mentioned this, but looking at this, the procurement timeline is spring starts the renewing of existing customers and also the vendor qualification, request for information, and even RFP process for potential new customers. If you kind of go through the timeline through the summer, the goal is by September 1st, all contracts are awarded. So I just want to ask you, maybe JP, I'll just throw it out to you. Like if you took a look at your entire portfolio for both renewing and potential new customers, do you think you're on pace to have all contracts awarded by September 1st? Because that is the best practice.
Best practice, yes. Reality, no.
Yeah, that's true. Good to hear.
I think customers right now are a little bit ahead of the game and are putting out RFPs. It all really depends on how fast they react and pull the trigger. All the RFPs that we are bidding right now do have some deadlines that say things will be done before September, which is great. Something always seems to come into play when you're dealing with customers. Someone's out on vacation or they're doing a restructuring or something comes into play with RFPs. It seems like between now and October. So I would say they're on track, but does it always happen? No. And then there's going to be the ones that, come August, all of a sudden are throwing out an RFP and they want it bid and ready to go by October, November. All really depends on the customer and what happens throughout those organizations. But for the most part, things are on track, but there'll always be those wild cards that will come in over the next 2 or 3 months that people are going to be like, yeah, we need this bid and we need it for this winter. So we take it with a grain of salt, but plan and are always willing to do what we can for the customer. Taking on a late contract sometimes is a positive too, because it's more of necessity by the customer and they need service. They need it done. It's going to get done. Not as much haggling back and forth. You're able to really give them the service they want and they can kind of see what you can provide to them kind of on an emergency kind of reactionary service on some late awards or late contracts. But for the most part, I'd say all our customers are on point and we're looking good right now.
That sounds great. That's positive. Tom, where are you guys? I know you're in the process now. What are you looking at for come September 1? Where do you think you'll be at?
I think we're prepared to have all our contracts in place by September 1st. And kind of same thing JP was talking about. Not everybody's ready or has their RFP out, and we deal with it a lot. We try to push as much as we can to get everything done as early as possible. Like I said, by June 1, we want our renewals out. I think that gives everyone plenty of time for those. It's just some of those, whether it's a property manager or whatever, I guess the organization is, not everybody even has their RFPs out at that point. So yeah, we're doing everything that we can. We're having those conversations. We're pushing everything to get settled as soon as possible. This is a great reason of why we do multi-year contracts. And any contract that we put out is a 3-year agreement. Not everything we do is necessarily, but again, this cuts down on what you have to renew every year and really trying to build that relationship with the customer, having that time to show them the type of service that you're going to provide. So yeah, that timeline is great. I would recommend anyone listening, pull that timeline out. You might want to make some adjustments and add some things to it, but that really is the base of where you need to be. And like I said, we're doing everything we can to meet September 1st, but I would say realistically, probably 60% or so of the contracts are done by September 1st. I would say we're probably close to 90 by October 1st, which does give us a good amount of time to plan. That first week of August, we always start our equipment lists and what's going where based on what we have right now. So that helps us be ready for some of those late things. We know what equipment we have available. We know where everything is set to go. So when we do get some of that later stuff, we know what we have available and we can assign it right away. And that makes things a lot easier. And another thing too, and just from you guys or JP talking a second ago, we're doing a lot of evaluating last season right now, whether it's square footage by our zones or seasonal versus per visit based on zones overall. And I think a really good thing that I'm going to do right now after listening is evaluate basically our revenue by our sign date, because I think that'd be a really interesting number to look at and see what percentage of that we really have each time. And maybe a lot of people are doing that right now. That hasn't been something I broke down, but I think that can help a lot in, I guess, identifying when is the best time for everyone to maybe make a cutoff and not take new contracts, or when they know they're pretty well set.
Yeah, good points. I'm glad you touched on that, the allocating of equipment, because certainly those conversations about like what equipment needs that you have really need to kind of be an ongoing process as well too. And that's kind of good to know that August 1, you start that kind of allocation process of where you're going to have equipment on at sites, or what do you need to have ready at your headquarter or satellite properties. JP, what about your company? What are you doing for equipment allocation, and kind of what's your time frame for that?
Yeah, I think overall, as we get contracts, we're always looking at, okay, if we were to get this, do we have equipment? Do we need equipment? So we know what we have renewed. So we've already kind of allocated our equipment outright already to the renewal locations. And then as we're looking at RFPs, or if we're looking at new sites, one of our first thoughts is, okay, is this something that we have, or are we going to have to purchase, or are we going to have to rent? And that kind of also directs us on how we're going to bid some RFPs depending on when they come through. Do we have the equipment ready to go? Okay, great. We're good to go. We can bid this. We can kind of bid it maybe a little bit more aggressive. Or are we going to need new pieces of equipment? Do we have, the right size pusher? Do we have the right size loader? Do we have enough trucks? Do we have sidewalk equipment? So you're looking at all that when you're trying to add on new contracts, new RFPs. And that's just part of our bid process when we're thinking about it. Okay, what will we need to add to our fleet if we were to get this awarded, and then plan ahead of time. A lot of stuff when we're bidding RFPs, we're putting in purchase orders, or we're putting in requests for equipment before we even win it, because if we wait till September, October, then we're going to be scrambling a bit more. So we're always trying to be ahead of the game and always have a somewhat of a surplus of equipment, so that we can make sure late awards or things that come through, we're able to help our customers out as quickly as possible and not be dependent on how we can get equipment or when we can get equipment. And we want to make sure at the same time we can always get the right equipment. So we're not winning an RFP and then saying, oh, well, we can't get a certain type of loader and a pusher because they're all been purchased. Now we've got to go smaller or bigger, and it's either oversized or undersized for the property, and we're either going to be spending more time or less. So we've got to be as aware of our allocation as possible up to the minute. So we're always looking at what we have and where it's going as we are bidding RFPs and winning RFPs.
Great points, JP. I'm going to wrap up the postseason here conversation. I want to ask this to you, and I'll add to it as well too. It's just kind of a statement going in for next winter season, and it can be a sentence or even a little bit more than that if you like. But my assessment to start off with is for next year, looking forward to it, is I'm optimistic. And I say that mainly because several parts of the country that we talked about really had almost a zero snow to very little. And if you look at the averages for across the country in Canada, that's going to change. Most times after seasons like that, you'll get either an average, maybe even a slightly above average year. So I'm definitely optimistic. I'm also, if you get into some of the weather stuff, I'm optimistic that we're coming off of a third year of a La Nina, and it's looking like potential to be an El Nino year next winter. So I think after having 3 years of La Nina, I think that would be helpful for a good amount of snowfall across North America. So that's my statement kind of going into thoughts for next year. Tom, what's your thoughts on just a statement for next winter season?
Yeah, I think any change in the weather pattern would be a plus for us here right now. Even though we've had average snow the last few winters, it's been definitely on the warmer side, and we've had a shorter winter where we've had a lot of our snow in 6 to 8 week periods. So I'll take a change in the weather pattern. That'll be good. And yeah, we're, like I said, I guess I'm always somewhat optimistic, but we just always have to prepare for a typical winter here. We have to prepare for double-digit storms and having those things in place. I think it was 4 or 5 winters without a double-digit storm, and it wasn't on the front of our mind to be prepared for relocation and have loaders in certain spots to help us be able to get to those quickly when it does happen. I think that was like 2016 to then 21 we did. So I think just staying on task with that and planning for the worst, basically, because that's what we have to be prepared for, and that's what our customers expect us to be ready for. So I think going into it, ready to service a normal winter, thinking about the worst that can happen and being prepared for that and having those things in place. And that's the mindset that we'll have going into this. And yeah, I expect us to have more snow next year.
Good to hear. And just to clarify, even for me too, when you say double-digit storm, you're talking about an event that's a 10-inch plus, right? Yeah.
Right. Correct.
Yeah. And that's good. You're preparing. You're right. I think that's good. Is a good point to prepare for some of these big events. If you're not prepared for that, then that's kind of when challenges and potential failures can happen. So that's great to hear. Okay, JP, you're heading into next winter season. What's your statement or thoughts or perspective on it?
The statement is it's Mother Nature, so you have to be prepared. You got to plan for the worst and be ready to go, especially when it's snow. I would hope that people don't take this smaller winter that we just had and are like, oh, well, I have till November, December, even January to get my equipment ready to go. It's going to be normal business for us, making sure that we're ready to go come, October 30th. We've got equipment ready. We've got people ready. We've got everything's ready to go. If anything we learned, being able to travel, especially throughout New England, when you get these bigger events, if we do start getting bigger snow totals like Buffalo had, we were able to travel twice this year to Buffalo for a week at a time and help out an area that was inundated with feet of snow where they didn't have enough loaders or enough plow trucks or enough manpower to clear out the areas that they already have. And we were able to do that because we were ready in our area and we were having a low winter and we were able to just move that equipment northwest, 8 hours and able to use it for a storm. So I think everyone should just be ready. Normal winter. Plan on it's going to be your normal average and you'll be fine, because if you're planning for your normalcy, whatever happens, you'll be ready. If you get a bigger winter, you're going to be moving forward and grabbing more equipment or more guys and scrambling that way, but you already got your base and you're ready. If it's a lower winter, okay, well then we all will move around and try to figure out how we're going to get hours for guys or whatnot, but we're ready. Be ready for what you have is really the statement I would have, because as we've seen over the last 5-10 years, Mother Nature's unpredictable as always, but if you're ready, then you won't have any issues, and just make sure you're not pushing your timelines or stretching yourself too thin or saying, oh, last year we only got 2 inches in New York. I can pick up an extra 100 sites. Okay, well now New York gets a nor'easter and now they've got a foot of snow and now you can't service your sites because you're, expecting a lower winter. So be prepared for what you have, be ready to service for your customers, and everything will be hunky-dory.
That sounds great. Good points. I do want to thank Tom, JP. Thanks for joining me, not just today, but in the 3-part series that we've had on snow operations, and encourage listeners to catch up on those episodes if you haven't listened to them, and the other parts of and episodes and content that we have on Snow Talk. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen. Have a good day, and looking forward to seeing you this June at the Snow and Ice Symposium.
Thanks for joining us for Snow Talk, sponsored by Western Snowplows. We hope you enjoyed it. Check out the latest episodes of Snow Talk, including any you may have missed, at www.sima.org/podcast.